What's going on, my fellow warriors? This is Musou Prince here with another Royal Rambling. With the release of Cthulu and yet another Pantheon to add to Smite's roster, I think now would be a good time as any for me to make this video. In this Royal Ramble, I'm going to discuss my own wishlist of gods that I want in the game, and talk about what their design should be, assigned roles, and even skills that they should have in their repertoire. Now this whole list is how I feel about these gods and what I'm going to talk about regarding their skills. So fair warning that this is all my opinion, and if you don't exactly agree with me, then that's fine. I don't expect everyone to agree. So now that that's out of the way, let's begin! First up on my list is number 10 is the Shinto god of wind, Fujin. Now the reason why Fujin is so low on this list is because this guy has a guaranteed spot on the roster because of his brother, Raijin. Now in actual mythos, Fujin is said to look like an elderly demon with green skin, as his lower body is donned in a leopard skin clothing, and he's always carrying with him his legendary bag of winds. Now I believe to work alongside Raijin's design, Fujin should be a bit more lanky than his steroid-induced brother, and should have a white beard so long that even Guan Yu would be jealous, with a matching set of long, white, wild hair. As for his skills, Fujin definitely needs to have most, if not all of his skills based around his bag of wind. For his first ability, I believe it should contain a line shot, where he shoots a burst of wind out from his bag, just something simple. His second ability should be a cone ability that uses a burst of wind to push an enemy god and stun them if they hit a wall/object. For the third ability, it should be a jump, where he shoots air from his bag to cause an initial force of radiant damage where he started, and slam down a second circle radius of damage where he lands. For his ult, Fujin definitely has to have a global, where he allows his bag of wind to carry him at great speed and land where his area of damage would cause a knockup. As for his passive, I think it would be fitting if his passive is a stacking based one, where with every attack he does, he gains a stack of air that fills up his bag of winds. With a full stack of 30, he could then use 10 stacks in order to empower his abilities. And with all this said, Fujin would fit in as an assassin role, using the jungle to build up his passive in order to provide hurting ganks to his enemies with the power of wind. Number 9 is yet another representative of the Shinto Pantheon, Izanagi, the Shinto god of creation. I'm honestly really surprised that Izanagi was not put in yet, since his wife and his two most important children, Ami and Susanoo, were added in too. So again, Izanagi is low on my list since he's definitely going to be coming out soon, hopefully within the following year span. Being the god who created Japan, as well as the father of so many powerful kami, Izanagi has this visage of patriarchy surrounding him in his images, and he's mostly seen wearing some kind of white kimono, so the design should definitely have him wearing that same robe, but maybe with some old-fashioned armor worn over top, and he should definitely have long straight black hair like he does in the pictures. But I'm kinda torn whether he should have it free and flowing, or tied up in some kind of an eccentric looking ponytail. But most importantly, he needs to be wielding his iconic spear, Ame no Nuboko. His skills were a little tough to really think on as well, but I decided that his ability should be based around water, because one of feudal Japan's mythos surrounding Izanagi was that the use of water was used as a means to fight back impurity. So his first ability should be aligned with him slashing his spear against the ground as a torrent of water is sent ahead of him, much like Poseidon's one, but a bit more faster and of course not doing as much damage as Poseidon's one. His second ability should be a ranged radial ability where he stabs his spear into the ground and causes a vortex of water to shoot down, where he has the radial cursor aimed, causing a slow to be given to a hit god for a couple seconds. And his third ability, it should be a radial ability surrounding him, where he uses purifying water to do minor healing, as well as give reduced crowd control for a few seconds. For his ult, it's fitting if he had a limited global like Rama, and would aim a radial cursor where a massive spear from the sky would stab downwards, causing a radial area of damage, but also causes a radial wave of water to push back enemy gods in the surrounding radius to the radial cursor. The passive was a bit more tricky to think of for Izanagi, but I think it should be related to his connection of purification in his fight against darkness. I feel as if Izanagi's passive should be an area of effect, where enemy debuffs are decreased in either length or damage, and allied buffs should be increased in enhancement of length, making him a game changer in team fights. And with all of this talked about, Izanagi would definitely fit the primary role of warrior with his sustainability and balanced moveset. But in terms of like any kind of role swapping, like much with Horus, he could also have swapping potential to go as a heavily supporting guardian with his healing passive, fitting for Pantheon's powerful patriarch. With Sun Wukong being a beloved character in both Smite as well as around the world, it's surprising that not any more characters from the Journey to the West was added. That's why next on my list is the pig boy himself, Zhu Baijie. This design should be as easy as well as a fun one, since Zhu Baijie is a big half-pig whose clothing should be unfit, allowing his big belly to be revealed. His clothing itself should either be worn-out peasant clothes or a dirtied-up faded general robe showing his past connection as a heavenly general, and for his weapon of choice, none other than his 9-tooth rake. Thinking of what kind of abilities Baijie should have was definitely tough, since he only really used his rake in the original story to fight back demons, and didn't really have any significant abilities much like Sun Wukong had. So his abilities in Smite should at least be surrounded by his rake and body size. His first ability should be a line, in using his rake to stab into the ground and pull gods and enemies alike towards him. If his initial stab hits an enemy god or minion, they will be stunned for 1 second after being pulled in. His second ability should be another line ability, but much more slower because of what it does. He would slam his rake into the ground, sending out a dust cloud, where if it hits an enemy, it'll cause a silence for both auto attacks and abilities, simulating a sort of blinding effect. For his third ability, it should have something to do with his monstrous appetite, so I think it should be a sustaining move where he eats food to give himself armor. And for his ult, I wanted it to symbolize not only his demonic strength, but his iconic clumsiness in the story. So the ult starts with him in a full-on charge that he can control the direction he goes in. Any enemy god he hits in the charge causes a cripple or root effect, and at the end of his charge, Baijie falls over on his face, causing one last radio blast of damage that causes a knockup. And for his passive, I believe he should have an area of effect where as long as he has armor from his third ability, he should strengthen heals and weaken enemy heals. With all of those skills explained, his role is hands down a guardian role for his wide array of disruptions, showing enemy gods the power of the pig. This spot goes to yet another figure from the iconic Journey to the West. Number 7 goes to Sanzang. Now, I place Sanzang higher than Baijie because I feel Sanzang has a better chance of getting in first, since he's technically Journey to the West main character. It's just, of course, Sun Wukong had a lot more popularity. I mean, can you blame people for liking Sun Wukong? I mean, it's ridiculous. The look of Sanzang should be based somewhere around his original depiction, which was bald and wearing formal monk robes, maybe even throwing in some prayer beads he could have around one of his hands. And speaking of those prayer beads, since he is a Buddha monk, I feel like Sanzang's ability should be based around those prayer beads mentioned. His first ability should be a radial, where he throws a bead out that stays out and acts as a continuous area of damage to anyone in it, and after a few seconds it explodes, much like Scylla's one ability. This bead can also be destroyed though. The second ability is a line where Sanzang sends out a bead that deals an initial amount of damage, but also leaves behind a trail that deals continuous damage. Sanzang's third ability allows him to place a bead on either a minion or an allied god that permeates a radial area of effect. With his ult, Sanzang incites the power of the golden cicada, pretty much the Buddhist god that people believe that he was the reincarnation of, inspiring a radial aura of immortality around himself, keeping his allies from dying for 5 seconds, somewhat inspired by Zenyatta's ult with a mix of Baptiste's immortality field from Overwatch. His passive was a bit fun in creating, seeing that it should be alternating effects each time Sanzang uses an ability, including his ult. There are different elemental effects that Sanzang uses with the areas of effect his abilities leave behind, being a fire effect, an ice effect, a dark effect, and finally a light effect. The fire charm does increase continual damage in the ability's areas, ice charms cause slow, dark charms cause ability silence, and light charms give slow healing, giving Sanzang amazing lane control and teamfight potential. For the use of explosive damage together with tacked on area of effect damage, Sanzang would be added in under the mage role, to show everyone that he's not just a defenseless monk and can be able to fight back on his own. Being an avid user of Baron Samedi, I hoped for an eventual edition of a new voodoo god. I think the most fitting second edition would be Papa Legba, the voodoo connector of the human realm and the spirit realm. Popularly depicted as a decrepit, poorly dressed man wearing a straw hat, this is definitely how the design of Papa Legba should be based on, making the worn-out clothes he wears similar to the old-fashioned of early 20th century New Orleans, and the weapon he dons would be his signature cane and a smoking pipe that he's also seen depicted with. His first ability should be a cone attack, where he takes a puff of his smoking pipe and blows out a deadly smoke attack. The longer Legba inhales the pipe, the bigger the cone for the smoke blast. His second ability is a line where he snaps his fingers and the spirit of a big dog dashes through, causing damage and additional tick damage per second for 3 seconds. His third ability is a radial of effect where he sends out a 2-wave blast of spiritual energy, an initial small blast that deals heavy damage, and a second larger blast that causes small lingering damage to whoever is in the circle while it's active. Papa Legba's ult would send out a pack of spiritual dogs to attack and slow enemy gods. Similar to kind of like Bakasura's, but let's all admit, we don't like Bakasura's crippling area of effect with that ult. For Papa Legba's passive, he would have Hysteria effect like Baron, but instead his effect is called Spiritual Scent. Whenever Legba deals a certain amount of damage with his smoke and spiritual blast abilities, he'll gain stacks on Spiritual Scent. Stacking up to a max of 3, each stack of Spiritual Scent sends out a spiritual dog minion to attack on command of Legba's line ability with the massive Spirit Dog. With great area burst damage and a passive that allows him to pressure, Legba would fit among the roster as Mage role, showing everyone the power of the spirit world's intermediary. Coming in at number 5 would be a long-awaited addition to the Norse pantheon, as well as the Odinson family, Baldur, the god of light and love. Usually depicted in just a loincloth, the design for Baldur should be a little bit more fitting for someone who is known as the courageous invincible warrior. Maybe some light armor over top some fabric clothing to at least have some resemblance to his picture depictions. And his weapon would possibly be a spear and shield. I don't even remember in the lore of him having some kind of special weapon like Thor or Odin has, so yeah, definitely just a normal spear and shield. For his first ability, it would be a line where he throws his shield out. If it hits an enemy god, a burst of light would shine, causing a blast of damage, and also temporarily blinding the enemy god like what Ra's area attack does. If uninterrupted, the shield would return back to Baldur, dealing a second wave of damage. If his shield hits an enemy on the way back, it'll go straight through the enemy god, dealing damage like it would to minions. Baldur's second ability would be a line where he chucks his spear, covering it in light as it pierces through enemy minions and gods alike. This ability can be used while strafing and backpedaling like some of Achilles' moves. His third ability is a cone, where he uses his shield to bash any within his range. This ability can cause stun to both enemy gods and minions alike. Baldur's ult has him envelop himself in a shine of light before he grips his spear with both hands and performs a dashing lunge. The first god he hits will be pierced onto the end of his spear and dragged along in the charge, taking an initial damage from the strike and additional damage for the remainder of the charge. If Baldur charges into a wall, his ult will immediately stop with him pulling his spear out from the wall. If he's carrying an enemy and hits a wall, a burst of light will blast from within the enemy god, dealing damage before Baldur retrieves his spear. If Baldur doesn't hit a wall while piercing an enemy god, Baldur stops in his tracks, shooting a burst of light that sends the pierced enemy god back a bit in front of Baldur. Baldur's passive has himself enveloped in a shroud of light the more he deals and takes damage. The Shroud of Light stacks for a certain amount of damage dealt and taken, a cumulative. It can stack up to 5 times, giving Baldur a 5% buff in physical and magical defense per stack, stacking to a full 25%. In help to Baldur's sustainable passive and high potential for early game wave clears and late game damage dealing, the warrior role is what I would place Baldur in, allowing the God of Light to shine the battlefield with his courage. When Mulan was first added in, an actual historical figure who has been deified, it immediately gave me hope that a certain ancient warlord would be added in due to him being deified as a demon king. So as number 4 on my list, I wish for the addition of the Japanese warlord Nobunaga Oda. I've always enjoyed picturing a design for this character since he's had many video game iterations with varying designs, making him either a typical Japanese garbed warlord or a warrior donning Western-inspired armor. If I would choose something that would last in people's minds, I would go with his design being Western-inspired like his armors in Samurai Warriors and Nioh. And for something I believe would be an interesting weapon choice in tangent to one of his most famous battles, Nobunaga should wield a flintlock rifle instead of a usual samurai sword. With his abilities, Nobunaga should be based around his iconic leadership using different troop types. His first ability would be a simple line ability he performs himself. He would fire a massive shot from his gun that would pierce through enemy minions and gods alike. However, if the bullet passes through allied minions and gods, they would receive a short boost of attack speed for 3 seconds. Nobunaga's second ability would allow him to summon archers that directly aim for enemy gods if they're within range. These soldiers stay around for up to 5 seconds and can be defeated like a minion. Nobunaga's third ability is a target radial, where when used, Nobunaga orders a cannonball to be fired where targeted, dealing damage. Nobunaga's ult burrows from his most famous troop formation, where he has 3 lines of arquebuses that alternate between each fire, firing a round of rifles in the span of 1 second. This attack deals ongoing damage for 8 seconds, with each wave of bullets dealing to 50% of Nobunaga's damage, and this formation of troops can also be destroyed, but it would have as much health as say Argus would, maybe even slightly less. Nobunaga's passive is in correlation to his fame as being one of Japan's greatest military leaders. When minions are within a certain amount of distance from Nobunaga, they gain a 5% increase in all defenses, and when Nobunaga's health decreases by every 25%, nearby allied gods can gain stacks of 10% defense increase, stacking up to 30% total, so you better make sure you get rid of Oda first. With his supporting passive and burst-based pressuring abilities, Nobunaga would fall under the hunter role, giving fear to his enemies as the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven. This next number is actually a god I've wanted since the release of the Pantheon he's been a part of, and I know that Hi-Rez is stupid if they don't decide to actually put this character in at some point. For number 3, it's another representative of the Arthurian Pantheon and a fellow Knight of the Round, Lancelot. For Lancelot's design, I feel like everything about him has to scream dashing chivalry, giving him fancy light armor and a handsome face with a head of flowing hair, and of course in his hand he wields the magical blade Erendite. His abilities I feel should surround 2 different styles just like how Arthur and Merlin work. One of Lancelot's forms should follow a set of graceful and fast sword strikes, while his second form should follow a more fairy-based magical set of abilities to make a callback to his raising by the Lady of the Lake. For Lancelot's sword abilities, his first should be a line dash ability where he performs a single lunge forward, where a second wave of phantom slashes follows up behind him. His second sword ability should be a leap that leads into a quick spinning slash when he lands, slashing in a radial area. And his third sword strike should be a flurry of strikes that lasts for 3 seconds, and he can move and turn while the ability is active, allowing him to aim it wherever he wants. Now to his fairy form. His first fairy ability should be a line ability where he fires a ball of magic that leaves behind a trail of dust that increases his movement speed. The magical ball can also bounce off of walls to give this ability an interesting use. The second ability should be a radial target, where Lancelot shoots a blast of magic into the ground where it will travel to the target spot and explode a small area of magical dust. If this ability hits an enemy god, they will be stunned, and the third fairy ability should be a target warp ability that allows Lancelot to use a blast of magic to teleport him to his targeted spot. Now Lancelot's ult and passive should go hand in hand like Arthur. The more attacks landed on enemies and minions, the more energy Erendite will accumulate. When the energy is built up halfway, it unlocks the fairy form ult where Lancelot conjures up the magic in his sword and releases it in a pillar of energy, slashing it down in a straight line. Full energy unlocks Lancelot's sword form ult, where he uses the magical energy built in Erendite to allow him to move at an unseeable speed, giving him invincibility as he performs a tornado flurry of phantom slashes. As an example of what this would look like, think of Koga from Paladins. With his vast array of movement abilities, with his dashes, warps, and leaps, Lancelot will fit right at home in the jungle as an assassin, showing the enemy team the graceful might of a knight of the round. I'm really shocked that this character hasn't been added by now. Ever since the Hindu pantheon has been a staple pantheon in Smite, this character should have been added so early on. I'm talking about Shiva. Now, if it's because the religious people in India will riot, then how the heck did they allow Ganesh, a pacifistic god, to be added in? Yeah. So anyways, Shiva's design would have her enwrapped in gold and orange robes, much like her usual picture depictions, and Shiva could also be wearing all kinds of accessories from jeweled bands to beautiful necklaces and even a headpiece. He would of course have his third eye, and in 3 of Shiva's many arms, he would be wielding his famous Pashupatastra trident, Parshu axe, and Pinaka bow. Now, since Shiva has 3 different weapons he can use, each of those weapons can easily be translated into an ability. So the first ability should use his trident to shoot out a radial target of cosmic energy that deals damage when it lands, and then very slowly sucks in enemy minions and gods around it. The second ability should use his axe, where he strikes it into the ground to cause a line tremor to be shot out. The tremor ends when it either reaches its ability range or if it hits an enemy god, which will stun them. The third ability would finally use his bow, where the ability is another targeted radial, where Shiva shoots an arrow in the sky and it lands where the target is. But when it lands, a set of 4 arrows shoot down in the surrounding directions where the first arrow landed, followed by a second set of arrows that fall further out from the last set of arrows. Each wave of arrows after the initial arrow would do less damage than the previous one, and if an enemy god is hit by the initial arrow, they are slowed for 2 seconds. Shiva's ult triggers the god's infamous destructive power as he transforms into his destructive form, giving him heavy defenses and allowing him to send out slow but powerful punches that can be used to give different debuffs to the enemy team. And for Shiva's passive, every time he's able to successfully hit an enemy god with the initial damage of his abilities, his third eye opens up, revealing any hidden enemies that may be nearby. With a moveset of disruptives, a portable ward in his passive, and a highly sustainable ult with its own set of debuffs, Shiva should receive a role of Guardian and also be arranged just like Yamoja, as he can rain heavenly destruction down to those who anger him. Like I even need to say who my number 1 choice is. I mean, how can I not when Guan Yu is already in the game? If you have Guan Yu, you need to have this arguably better counterpart. I mean, Liu Bei is considered the strongest warrior in Chinese history, and his martial prowess and accomplishments can back that up. As much as I like Liu Bei's demonic visage in the Dynasty Warriors games, I think his design should be a bit more loyal to his original historical depiction, where he wears a flower-patterned robe garb underneath a heavy set of armor, with of course his famous headdress and wielding his iconic halberd, Sky Piercer. Being a warrior of great might and skill, his abilities need to represent that too. His first ability should be a line that has him performing a spinning slash through the line to finish off with a powerful final strike. If an enemy minion or god is caught in his initial spinning strike, they'll be dragged along for a guaranteed hit on his final strike. His second ability should have him pull out his bow and fire 3 radial targets in a straight line, the second and third arrow having slightly bigger radiuses than the first arrow. His third ability needs to be a buff that gives him a powerful aura, allowing him a boost in attack speed and movement speed. His ult I feel would be fitting if he performs a 2-part damaging ult. The first part of his ult has him chuck his Sky Piercer as hard as he can for an initial line attack. Now the second part is all about if he can hit an enemy god with his first attack. If not, Liu Bei performs an aggressive shoulder charge to retrieve his Sky Piercer. If his first strike is able to connect, it drags the enemy god to the end range of the attack and stuns them, while Liu Bei readies his bow for a speed-shattering shot that he fires straight at his halberd, causing a massive shock blast from the arrow connecting to the halberd to deal even more damage. And for Lu Bu's passive, whenever he leaves the team fountain, he mounts his trusty steed Red Hair, giving him a slightly less Pyromancer-like movement speed for 5 seconds. For his aggressive abilities and the passive for a quick return to lane, Lu Bu should definitely be the role of a warrior, as he would make anyone think twice in pursuing him. Well, that's my wish list for characters I want in Smite, and really do hope that some, if not all of them, end up earning a spot on the roster in the future. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this royal rambling, and I'll see you all next time. Later, guys!